Well, hello, and welcome to another lesson of the Focus on Agility CMS course. I'm Marcelo Lewin, the Headless Creator. As always, get a hold of me right there, Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. Today, my guest presenter is Joel Varty. He's the CTO of Agility CMS, and he's actually back for another great lesson. Today, he's going to talk to us and show us how to use roles and workflows inside of Agility for content governance. And speaking of content governance, I'm actually going to bring in Joel and we'll have a little conversation about that before we get started. Joel, welcome.
Hi, Marcelo. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you back. Thank you for doing this. Let's get started. Let's jump in. People if they want to know more about you personally, we got the other lesson they can go watch at the beginning. Today, I wanted to talk to you, since you are going to be talking about content governance inside of Agility. I wanted to take a step back a little bit and just talk about content governance in general. Maybe we can first define it. What is content governance so people understand that a bit better?
Yeah, so inside your CMS, is all the content presumably for things like your websites or your mobile apps or anywhere that you're sort of sharing content via the APIs. So you want to make sure that the right people on your team have access to do all the things with that content. And it could be that there's workflow that content needs to go through before it's going to be published on the website. Or maybe it has to do things like, be previewed and stuff like that. So you could even have external workflows that are happening. And we're going to focus today on mostly just making sure that's like, hey, don't just give everyone administrator access to everything. And how can you set that up?
This could include like translation, making sure that SEO is done properly. There could be many steps right in the process. Now, could it also include like field level content governance where you define how many characters and what are, or would that fall more under style guide?
Yeah, I think we spend a lot of time on the content modeling section and those kind of things. And obviously you can never do enough of that to get it great, put in like all the field help hints and making sure that all the links and the types are exactly right for the structure of the content. I want to focus more on the administration of the actual content from the who's going to be working with it, and what roles do people have, and how does content kind of flow through the system on a kind of a macro level.
And why is content governance important for those organizations that are going, let's just go live and we'll figure all that out later?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of organizations start with, what, we just want to get it out there. We're just trying to get our new design implemented. Oftentimes that's where people choose a new CMS when they're going to bring on a system like that, or they do a whole new content modeling exercise, and then everyone has access to everything. We really recommend looking at the team structure before that and setting up a good sort of rhythm of workflow with those various team members to make sure that everyone understands what their job is, and how they fit into what makes the most sense. And that oftentimes start off with a whiteboard of how content should move through, as opposed to let's jump in and start working in the CMS right now.
And involve your team that's going to be affected by that governance, right? That's
Absolutely.
Really important. Don't do it in a silo. Yeah. Finally, before we jump into your presentation, how does an organization prepare for content governance?
Well, a lot of the times we'll work with customers and just talk to the members on their team, and that's usually the first thing. It's just like, let's have a conversation about what your job is and what content is important to you within the organization. What team do you work on? What department are you part of? And to sort of set that up. And once we have the team set up in terms of like, hey, this is our list of people and what they all need to do, then we try to map that into the roles that are available within the CMS itself inside Agility, and then go from there to say, from a whole instance level, what does everyone need to have access to? And then what do people need to do at the sort of more micro levels for individual pieces of content?
I think at the end of the day, it's important to at least think about content governance, right? Even if you're not going to design it and implement it, at a minimum, think about it, because it'll save you a lot of headaches in the future.
Yeah, 100%. At least make it a choice if you're going to give everyone, administrator access to start from. And make it a choice to make it on purpose.
Right, exactly. Okay, cool, great. Well, we see your slides. I'm gonna let you get started on the presentation. For those of you watching live in the chat, if you have any questions for Joel or myself, go ahead and throw it in there. I'll jump in and ask Joel. Joel, it's all yours.
Thanks. Yeah, so just a few slides to get started to give us some point of reference to talk about stuff here. So with each content team, you're going to have folks with different roles and responsibilities. And we want to make sure that that's reflected within the CMS, just like I was talking about earlier with Marcelo. So that's number one idea, is that understand who's on your team. what are the different, roles on the team of people who are represented now. And sometimes you might have an idea of, oh, we don't have someone in this role yet, but we will. And so there's, we need to account for how the team is going to grow as well. These are the various roles that are available within Agility CMS. I'm just going to go through each one real quick. And this is in a kind of an order. So as someone who's just a reader, this is someone who has access to see the content within the content manager itself, but they don't have access to edit anything. This is great for if you want to allow them in there, but only give them access to maybe create or manage things in a certain section. And we'll get into that in the demo in a little bit. A contributor has reader access, but they also have the ability to create content. And they can edit the content that they've created, but they can't edit content that someone else has created. This is really good for someone who is, maybe they're in there creating blog posts as a guest editor and they only have access to a certain number of things. If you have editor access, then you can edit anything anyone has created, which is really useful for someone who needs to go through to potentially, fix copy, or, they want to be able to review all of the content. As an approver now, this is where we get into workflow. So an approver can edit content, but they also have the ability to click approve on content that's been requested for approval. And we'll show that as part of the workflow. Publisher is the next step in the workflow, where content that's been approved now can be published by a publisher to go live on the various channels that it needs to be available from through the API. So that's the kind of workflow stuff. And content can be declined, which means it goes back to be, an editor could then change it again, request approval, and go through that cycle again. And we'll show what that workflow looks like a little bit. Then there's a little bit more specific ones if we go on the column on the right. For report viewer, this is someone who is specifically able to see reports. And this is useful if you have someone that maybe they're like a C-level access where they have reader access. You don't necessarily need them to edit anything on the website or in your content, but you need them to be able to see things. So report viewer is really useful for that. Then we have the designer role. So that's a very specific role that allows people to add modules onto pages. And there's a couple other permissions that are available through there too. So that's a really interesting one because we don't necessarily want someone to move the components around within the pages. Then we have some more advanced ones here. So a manager has access to all the settings, but they can't add users. Then we have the delete access. So a delete is an additional role you would add on to something like contributor potentially, or editor if you want them to be allowed to delete a particular thing. And then we have administrator who has full access to do everything. And as I was saying before, you probably don't want to give everyone administrator access, but it's also a really good way to learn the system when you're trialing it or trying out something for the first time.
A couple of things there. Agreed about the administrator. Don't give everybody, and I've seen companies do that because it's the easiest thing. Just give everybody access. They have access to all content types, everything, and then they realize, oh my God, something disappeared from the website, and it was an author that did it by mistake with admin access. Number one. But question on the roles. Number two, on the roles. Are you able to create custom roles? For example, let's say we have a translator, right? That we just want the ability to translate into Spanish pages, right? Are we able to create that?
So custom roles, that's a feature that's actually coming in about 3 weeks into Agility, 3 weeks to a month. It's in development right now. And another feature that's coming is something called Teams, where you can give a whole group of users a particular role access. So those two features kind of work hand in hand, and they are coming down the pipe, not available just yet. But a lot of times you can do most of what you need to do with the roles that are there. And we work with customers a lot to sort of make sure that we kind of have all those little, people call them nuances, I often use word, to get all those nuances of how the access should be distributed throughout the team.
Okay, cool, thanks.
All right, great question. All right, jumping through. So we can also have content access as well as, so the roles that I showed you, they can be applied globally, and we'll see how that looks, but we can also apply those roles to a particular piece of content within the system. So each one of those can have its own security. So you could give somebody reader access globally, but edit access to a particular piece of content. Each page can have its own security. And within the sitemap, this is hierarchical. So within a page, if I give someone security on the root to like a root page, all the pages underneath of that will by default inherit that security. So we'll look at how that operates. And then each asset folder within the asset section can also have its own security. So we can get pretty granular with all the different ways that we can assign roles within the CMS. And then those really apply really well to workflow, especially with the roles like approver and publisher. So you can set up your own workflow on each item, like I said, on whether it be content or pages, with a combination of role access and the notifications that go along with that, so that when someone requests access for something, then the approver can get notified, and so on and so forth. And that's sort of a high-level description that sort of describes everything. Now let's jump into the CMS to see what that actually looks like. So I'm going to demo today with actually my own personal website, because this is a website where I did give everyone administrator access because it was just me that was working on it. But let's go to the case where maybe I've got some more members that have been added to my team and I want to give them specific access to stuff. So I'm going to jump into the settings. I'm going to go to user management. All right. And you can see I've got 3 users in this system now. So one of them I'm going to call reader. So this is reader.agilitycms.com, and you can see they have the reader role. And so when they log in, they will only see they will only see stuff, they can't edit stuff. They won't see settings and they won't see reports or models, right? I can also give someone